Hi, I'm Femi OK. You're watching the stream. On today's episode, how rich is too rich? Have a look at my laptop. This is Forbes World's Billionaires list, the richest people in 2021. In the past year, there have been 660 new billionaires. I want you to look at this factoid. I'm just going to scoot down here a little bit so you can see it nice and clearly. A new billionaire was minted every 17 hours on average over the past year. Now, because we're in a global pandemic, this has sparked a whole conversation about wealth taxes. Should the super rich be taxed because they're super rich? I know you have opinions on this. If you're on YouTube, jump into the comment section and be part of today's show. We start the debate with Alex Cobham.
At the Tax Justice Network, we reckon that one nurse's annual salary is lost to tax havens every single second. And that's because of the tax abuses of multinational companies and wealthy individuals stashing their assets offshore. Those are the resources that we need now globally to fight the pandemic, to make sure there's public health services for everyone and worldwide vaccination as quickly as possible. We need to build back from the pandemic in a way that reduces the inequalities that scar our societies rather than worsening them. And that's why we need tax justice measures. We need progressive taxation of a radical sort to raise the resources we need.
Stand by for some more arguments for and against wealth taxes. Hello, Morris. Hello, Alison. Hello, Raphael. Welcome to the stream. Morris, introduce yourself. Tell everybody who you are, what you do.
Sure. I'm Morris Pearl. I live here in New York City. I run a group called the Patriotic Millionaires. We just wrote a book about taxing the rich, and that's what we need to do.
Right.
So thank you for having me.
Oh, you're so very welcome. Alison, introduce yourself to the stream audience.
Hi, I'm Alison Schrager. I'm a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, and I also wrote a book, not about taxes, but about risk, called An Economist Walks into a Brothel.
Nice to have you. Hello, Raphael. Good to have you in this conversation about wealth taxes. Tell everybody who you are and what you do.
Hello, everybody. My name is Raphael Wildauer. I'm senior lecturer in economics at the University of Greenwich, and we just published a paper where we estimate the revenue potential of wealth taxes in Europe.
Yes, I want to play you this little clip from the Forbes Chief Content Officer. His name is Randall Lane, talking about how people have got richer during the global pandemic. Here he is.
Last year, the world's billionaires were worth $8 trillion on the nose. This year, 13.1 trillion. That's more than $5 trillion up. So in terms of this pandemic year, it's been very, very good to people at the very, very top.
Morris, are you shocked?
No, I've known that all along. I'm far wealthier now than I was before the pandemic started, and I haven't worked for a living in 7 years. That's the problem. Some of us who don't even work are becoming wealthier and wealthier and wealthier because our investments are going up and up and up, and we pay far lower tax rates here in the United States because we get investment income that's taxed less than people who have to work for a living pay a tax rate. So that's what's causing part of the inequality that's destabilizing our society.
Alison.
Well, no, I mean, to some degree, of course, it's not surprising. It was by design. We had a lot of policies that propped up asset markets. And, you know, the stock market dropped a lot last March, and then it rebounded heavily. But that was largely also by a lot of Fed support to keep up the stock market. And so to a large extent, this was by design. Although it's also important to remember that it's not just rich people who are in the markets. About 50% of Americans, at least, own stock, and a lot of people in the UK through their pension accounts. So while the rich certainly grew more because they have more assets and more assets in risky portfolios, to some degree, we did all grow.
Raphael, is there a problem with rich people getting richer?
I mean, there is a pattern which we see very clearly in the data over the last 40 years that the richest people in society are growing richer. So this is not a short-term trend now because of the pandemic and the measures from the central banks, but this is a long, ongoing process. And the degree of inequality we have reached is at a similar level it was almost 80 years ago. To give you some numbers, now in the US, the richest 1% own more than a third of all wealth in the country. The richest 1% of US households. In Europe, it's about one third. So these are the inequalities, the levels of inequalities we are seeing, and that's not new. That's an ongoing, long-lasting trend since the last 40 years.
Alison, when we ask the provocative question, I'm going to show it here on my laptop, how rich is too rich? This is what Rhoda Mutasa sent us. Since when is it a crime to be rich? That is what capitalist society is predicated: work hard and be rewarded. Alison.
Yeah, so I think the image we showed in the beginning of all those billionaires, I think it's remarkable that they're all self-made and they all created companies that provided value. And I have a question for Raphael about the statistics he just showed, which, are correct and show some long-running trends. But here's a question as an economist I have, which is, did these people get rich at the expense of other people? I mean, is this a zero-sum game where if some people get super rich, they're necessarily making someone else worse off? Because if they're getting rich and making other people better off, is this necessarily even a problem?
No, I don't think that it's that simple to say that, well, some people are rich and it's all good. The others are just a bit more unfortunate. I mean, one of the reasons why we see
not just
this
unfortunate, but perhaps, as I said, Jeff Bezos got a lot richer because of Amazon this last year. But I know Amazon saved my life during the pandemic, the access to goods. So is him getting rich necessarily making me worse off, or is he even maybe making me better off too?
Well, I mean, it's the workers in the Amazon warehouses who work for under a lot of pressure and very low wages are certainly not doing well because Bezos, or better because Bezos is doing so well. I mean, we have a pattern
are they getting paid
the very
more
wealthy.
Than...
Let me please finish also here.
Sorry.
We have a pattern where over the last 40 years or so, we have certain industries which manage to extract rents from the rest of the economy, large profits which are way above what a normal kind of company makes, and that is at the cost and at the detriment of other parts of society. Yes, I do think so.
So let me just bring in some. Let me just bring in people who have a lot of money in this conversation. So Maurice, go ahead, and then I'm going to actually bring in the argument from millionaires and billionaires who want to pay a wealth tax. They want to pay money. Maurice, go ahead.
I mean, it's not bad that Mr. Bezos is rich. He's did a great job running Amazon, but I wouldn't call him self-made though. He started out with hundreds of thousands of dollars from his parents and friends and family, which is something, frankly, most of us can't do. And even if half of people in America have owned stock in the stock market getting richer, that means half the people don't. So it's not a problem that people like Mr. Bezos are becoming very, very wealthy. That's great. We're a capitalist country. What the problem is that a quarter to half of the people in our country are not earning enough to get by. And we can't survive if we have lots of poor people that are starting to march in the streets out there. And we have to do something about that. That's the inequality that's destroying our country.
Well, I think there's something else to that. I mean, I would say, which of course in America is a bit of a thorny issue, but I would say it's not so unproblematic that Bezos is so rich. And the reason is that the democratic society can only take so much inequality. I mean, if we see the kind of inequality we see today in the US, well, not only in the US, in Europe, in China, in Russia, where 1% of the population owns a third or 40% of the total wealth, that means that this tiny group commands a vast amount of resources, which in a democracy, in a healthy democracy, also means that they have way more ways to make themselves heard, make their cause. I think there are considerations there which go beyond saying, okay, good for a rich person to be rich, they did well. There are some more fundamental questions around equity.
Raphael, so there are super rich people who want to contribute more to society. They take our money. Have a look here on my laptop. Super rich call for higher taxes on wealthy to pay for COVID-19 recovery. Millionaires for Humanity. Millionaires want a wealth tax too. That's in response to our entire conversation today. And now I want you to meet the founder of Millionaires for Humanity, making the point about what can be done if you have huge wealth during a global pandemic. Have a listen.
We millionaires ask our governments to raise taxes on people like us. We are talking about a permanent wealth tax of around 1% of the world's biggest fortunes. As we continue to face the impact of the COVID-19 crisis and lack of funding for all the SDGs, we millionaires have a critical role to play in healing our world. Especially climate change and extreme poverty is out of control. We have definitely seen the rich get richer and the poor getting poorer over the last 3 decades. This will make an unsafe world for future generations. That's why we do this now. We therefore ask our governments, please tax us.
So I want to be clear here about what we're talking about. This is not regular tax. This is a wealth tax. Alison, define a wealth tax.
So it's very different from an income tax, which is what we have in America right now. And only a few European countries even have a wealth tax right now, which is you're actually taxing the stock of wealth rather than the amount of income you get each year. It would be like a tax on your bank account or your brokerage account. And it would, so as I said, it is a very different kind of tax. And it is also a much more difficult tax to collect. Because unlike income taxes, we don't actually have good data on what wealth people have, what they own, especially very rich people who keep a lot of their assets in private companies that are very hard to value, or things like art or overseas property. So it is fundamentally very different. Income taxes are very easy to collect because we've got great data on income. You know, your employer reports how much they paid you. The IRS knows that. You can tax that. But wealth is fundamentally very different. As in economics as well, it also sets up very different incentives. And so, as I said, creates a very different economic model.
Maurice, your book is called Tax the Rich. How do you tax the rich? What do you propose?
Well, we do propose something like a wealth tax. Look at Mr. Bezos again, for example. He might have no income at all. He's the richest person in the world. And so income tax, yeah. A wealth tax is hard to administer. Sure, that's true. But we do it. Here in the United States, we have estate taxes, and that's essentially a wealth tax that's taxed once per each person. We also have more than half of our people in our country are paying a wealth tax because middle-class homeowners here in the United States pay real estate taxes, and almost all of their wealth is their homes. So I think we're asking that we have wealthy people like these billionaires, yes, some of whose wealth is hard to measure and some of whose isn't, pay the same kind of tax that most middle-class Americans have been paying for years.
So, Maurice,
I think it's important to understand Jeff Bezos would be paying capital gains taxes, potentially. So it's not like he's paying nothing. So I think it's important to understand that. Sorry, just one thing.
Alison, finish your thought, Alison. Don't leave us hanging. Yeah, because, but here's the thing. So are we talking, Maurice, then? Are you talking about just closing the loopholes, which I don't think is even possible? Once one loophole is closed, another one opens.
It's not a loophole. People investors like me or like Jeff Bezos at a much smaller extent. I mean, I have $1 million worth of stock in Amazon. That's great. But we pay taxes at tax brackets of 0%, 15%, and 20%. That's far less than even you pay as a working journalist.
Yeah, we need to speak, Maurice, about this. Raphael, go ahead.
The loopholes, I'm not too worried about them. I mean, Alison is right that the income tax works well because the IRS gets the information on your earnings. We could do something very similar with respect to wealth. Wealth is recorded. I mean, financial institutions have a lot of these records, not of everything, but of financial wealth. We have data on the value of real estate. I mean, there are large real estate markets in the UK, in the US. We do have a lot of that information, or could make it available relatively easily. The tax haven issue, which with which we started out and heard about from Tax Justice UK, there are estimates that in the US about 10% of the very, very rich keep their assets abroad. So
right.
There is a problem, but enforcement can be done. I mean, money can be traced. The IRS needs some resources.
I think you're minimizing the extent of how difficult this is. It's true that we do estate taxes, but this is a one-time thing that we do once, and it takes a lot of resources. There's a lot of leakage. It's for a very small amount of the population because the rates on it, it's just the cutoffs are so high. But also, I mean, we also have to understand that
because it's plannable and avoidable. That's the key problem with the estate tax.
So yes, we have lots of questions for you, lots of questions and thoughts for you. I'm just going to interrupt because that conversation between you, Raphael, and Alison could go on for a very long time, and our audience would love to get in as well. This is Victor. Victor is suggesting, Morris, tax anything over $1 billion. Your thoughts, quickly.
Well, yeah, that's what we're talking. We're talking here in New York, in the United States, about a wealth tax will affect a tiny fraction of our people. New York State, where I live, is considering a wealth tax that would affect a few hundred people. And yes, it would be hard to administer, but I don't think the problem is so much cheating and stealing. Most people are basically honest. I think the problem is we don't even attempt to tax the rich people because we don't tax the wealthiest people except on their income. And yeah, you can look at a paycheck of somebody like Jeff Bezos, and he makes less money than you do on his actual paycheck because he has huge amounts of stock in Amazon that he owns, and he doesn't need to earn a paycheck.
So I'm going to put this comment to you, Alison, if I may, because I want the audience to interact with you as well, if that's OK. Here's Sleeping Panda. There comes a point where the rich no longer make money, but take money. Alison, thoughts?
I don't think that's true. I don't think we've proven that the economy is zero-sum. Even when we were talking about the large rents that these companies are extracting, we're talking often about tech companies that provide services for free. So, and as I said, I don't think we should really give up on, we have to acknowledge the fact that it's really hard to value privately held companies. Like if they're not traded on the stock market, getting a value of them is very difficult. And we already see a big trend towards companies staying private and investors, sort of high-end investors, certainly wanting to invest in private equity, assets that cannot be valued. And if we had a wealth tax, we would just increase that incentive even more. To some degree, it's sort of like break the thermometer, you don't have a fever. If we had a wealth tax, people would find all sorts of ways of making their wealth look a lot smaller. So I guess that would help wealth inequality. But at the same time, we wouldn't really know the extent of it nearly as much as we do now.
Let me bring in the head of the IMF, who is making a case for what could happen during a global pandemic if the wealthier were a little bit more generous with their wealth. Have a listen.
This year, next, vaccine policy is economic policy. Faster progress in ending the health crisis could add almost $9 trillion to global GDP by 2025. Best value for public money in our times. But this window of opportunity is closing fast. What this crisis has shown us is just how unescapable our shared destiny is. Now we must build on this broader sense of common responsibility to foster a fair recovery and a resilient post-pandemic world.
Morris, I am wondering if this pandemic has made us think differently about wealth and taxing and what is possible with a lot of money, particularly when we're seeing more billionaires than we've ever had before.
I think it certainly made us think differently. We have, something close to a quarter of our people have become unemployed, at least part of the time of the pandemic, because of the COVID virus crisis. Yet the richest among us have become richer and richer and richer. And we're not saying they're bad people. We're not saying Amazon is a bad company. We're not saying anybody's evil. No, they're good people doing good things, providing a valuable service that Alison and I both love to shop at Amazon. But we're just saying these people who are making humongous amounts of money and paying less taxes than regular people are on their paychecks at a lower tax rate, they need to pay more taxes to reduce inequality somewhat.
This is an interesting point from Clovis. I'll put this one to you, Raphael, and then you can pick up off the point that you were going to make as well. Clovis says on YouTube, the role of the government is to ensure the worst off in society has access to opportunities to succeed and improve their lives. Tax the super rich is not the solution. Stronger institutions are. Raphael?
Well, I would say it's not an either or, it's not that a wealth tax hinders the government from providing good education. It's the other way around, I would say. For example, when you talk about education, it's that a wealth tax would allow the government to fund these endeavors more easily. But I think on a kind of a bigger picture point, our discussion so far, we now touching upon the vaccines and the pandemic. I think when we talk about the wealth tax, we can distinguish between two purposes. Do we want the wealth tax because we want to fund these things like the pandemic recovery, or we want to fund climate change policies, or do we really want the wealth tax because we want to do something about inequality? And the kind of wealth taxes you need for these two different approaches are very different. If like the one Morrison proposed 1%, that won't do much for really bringing wealth inequality down. It would be a valuable tool to raise revenues, but will not really be able to reduce wealth inequality meaningfully. For that, we would need a progressive wealth tax, which is able to reduce the share of the very richest person.
I'm just going to bring
Wouldn't 1% above $1 billion be progressive? I mean, you're only being taxed if you have a lot of money. That sounds progressive to me.
No, if everybody pays 1% on whatever the wealth is, it's a flat tax.
Not everyone has $1 billion. I wouldn't have to pay it.
Yeah, but it's a flat tax. I mean, it's the definition of a flat tax is that the tax rate doesn't change with the tax base.
Well, but the tax base is only if it has $1 billion or more.
Sorry?
In 2 brackets is somewhat progressive. I think we're actually proposing 3 brackets in the United States. But yeah.
No, but this is not how we understand. I mean,
also 1% might sound low, but it is a lot bigger than it sounds. Like the risk-free rate is less than 1%, which means if you're not investing in risky assets, you're paying more in taxes each year than your wealth is bringing in. So your wealth would actually fall.
But not as a billionaire. Which billionaire makes 1% on their billions? I mean, we know from the data that
so you're
rates of returns go up a lot at the upper end of the distribution.
Why is there, Morris, I'm just wondering, why is there such a fierce debate about this when millionaires themselves are saying, yep, we've got the money, we want to help? Why do people who don't have the money argue about it?
Yeah, here in the United States, people have been told from 40 years ago that, the government is evil, taxes are evil, we must each be independent and do our own thing and not help each other. And we simply have to change that philosophy. We have to have the philosophy, as your previous speaker said, that we're kind of all in this together and we're all going to succeed or fail. And we can't have a society where there's a few extremely rich people and lots of poor people. They tried that in South Africa in the 1980s. That did not end well for the rich people. I think we have to have a change, and we need some kind of more progressive tax system. And even the wealth tax we proposed, as Alison said, are somewhat progressive, and that would be a good thing.
Alison, do you feel that you're on the losing end of this argument or the winning end of this argument?
The winning end.
Raphael?
We actually mostly agree.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I definitely also feel strongly we need to find a way to raise more revenue. And particularly, I think the way we do it should be progressive. I just don't think the wealth tax is the most efficient or best way to do it. But I think we do largely agree we need to raise more revenue, and that should be progressive.
Raphael?
I would add that if we really want to do something about wealth inequality, a wealth tax is a very potent measure in the short term. And what I mean by a progressive wealth tax would be one where the rate goes up. So where a person which has 3 million pays 1% and a billionaire pays a much higher rate. This is would be a progressive wealth tax, which would be a tool to reduce inequality.
So you would have wealth taxes on even sort of not rich people?
No, that's a different question. That depends on where is the threshold? Where do we start to tax? I mean, if you say a person with $2 or $3 million is not rich, that's a different debate. But we know that the top 1% start around 4 or 5 million.
This not rich person has to wrap up the show. Thank you so much. I'm just going to show you where you can find all of our guests so that you can follow them. Morris is at the Patriotic Millionaires. You can follow him. And look, tax the rich. You may well get some clues as to how to do that or how to be rich. Alison is right here on Twitter. And also Raphael, you can follow on Twitter as well. Thank you, YouTube. Love your conversation. I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.